Hey guys, how's it going? Over the last few weeks, I have tested and used every single character in My Hero Ultra Rumble to give you guys a definitive tier list of where everyone is currently at in game. This will also be the base tier list I work off of in future videos, so if any major changes happen, we can update this tier list. I'd also like to mention that this was done on console, where aim assist plays a big part in the meta, so this list may not be so accurate for PC players. And one more final thing I'd like to say is, no character in this game is outright terrible. Just because a character is in a lower tier doesn't mean they can't be good. It just means that overall there are better options. With all of that out of the way, please don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into this. Starting with our only D tier character, we have Shiozaki. It's sad to see her this low because I think she has potential, but currently the way she is makes her arguably the worst character in My Hero Ultra Rumble. Let's start with her alpha skill. This is probably her best attack. Shiozaki shoots her vines towards where you aim. This skill is amazing for a few reasons. It has so much range, like more than you think it would, so you can freely attack enemies with it and be at a safe range. And while her alpha skill doesn't do that much damage, if you are fighting alongside your teammates like you should be with Shiozaki, then you suddenly become very dangerous to other teams. Next we have her beta skill. This is good but also kind of useless. I like to call this one her keep off me skill. Shiozaki shoots her vines in all directions around her, doing damage and knocking anyone nearby away. This skill also has super armor, so it can't be stopped. The reason I say it's kind of useless is because generally, with a keep off me skill, you use it then try to move in a different position. But since Shiozaki is such a slow character, and people always rush you in this game, if you use the skill to knock them back, and then they immediately get back up and carry on rushing you, they're not really giving you time to relocate. Next we have her Gamma skill. This attack has one-shot potential if you are with teammates. Shiozaki grabs and traps an enemy with her vines, then slowly crushes them, doing big damage. But the really good thing about this skill is that when you are doing damage to the enemy, your teammates can also do damage. So, if you are all attacking that trapped enemy, they will most likely get KO'd. But also, unlike other skills in the game, if you miss this one, it doesn't take the charge away. So, you don't have to worry about missing the attack. And finally, we have Shiozaki's special skill, her Revive. This ability is god tier, being able to revive someone even if you are not that close to them. And, in some occasions, even through walls and other obstacles. So overall, Shiozaki is one really good support character, if you're willing to play that role. Moving on to C tier, we have none other than Mr. Compress. He is a character that feels kind of mid to use, but once you get used to him, he can be an extremely good character. He recently got a buff that makes his Gamma skill pretty much instant. This skill is what gives Compress such good mobility, but also, if there are enemies close to you, Compress's Gamma will also do damage to them. Compress also has his Beta skill, which can turn the tide of battle depending on who you are against. With this skill, Compress can deflect any projectile, which is great if he's against someone like Bakugo or Endevor, who do huge damage. Mr. Compress also has his special ability. With this, Compress can pick up his teammates and carry them around. So if you're using a character like Shiozaki whose mobility is non-existent, Compress will be the ideal teammate for her, but that's not all his special ability does. It also heals your teammates while they are being carried, which can be a lifesaver if you end up in one of those matches where, for some reason, you can't find any potions, shield or health. Mr. Compress's only real downside is the randomness of his projectiles. Unlike other characters in the game where it's a point and shoot, Compress's projectiles kind of arc in a weird way and can miss a lot of the time, but besides that, Mr. Compress is a great choice if you like a movement kind of playstyle. Next in C tier, we have Kendo. On paper, Kendo is a near perfect character. She has amazing damage with her jabs, an alpha skill that works like a shotgun and does great damage at close range, and she even has a shield to protect her and her teammates from attacks. But Kendo has three very distinct and noticeable downsides that make her not as good as she first appears. The first being her special ability. I can 100% say with confidence that Kendo has the worst and most useless ability in all of the game. What does it do? It lets you pick up your teammates and throw them. The only practical use for this is if someone on your team is using fighting a character that isn't very mobile and you are trying to get to high ground. Other than this one very specific thing that can easily be fixed with a speed card, there are no uses for this skill. Can't throw a teammate into a battle because they will most likely lose. Can't throw a teammate away from a battle because the team you're fighting will focus you while you're holding the teammate and down you. I don't expect this special to ever be changed, but Kendo would massively benefit from a rework of this special. Second downside is that Kendo is not a very mobile character. She has no movement tools, so you pretty much have to carry a speed card with you at all times. And her third and final downside is something that isn't even Kendo's fault, and will most likely never be fixed, or can't be fixed, since it's out of Viking's control, and that is the fact that her Gamma skill, her most damaging attack, can just miss for no reason whatsoever. You've probably had it happen to you if you've played her, or it's happened to you when you're fighting a Kendo. The opponent can be right in front of you, and it will still miss for no reason whatsoever. The reasons being, 1, it is an extremely easy attack to roll out of by dodge rolling, and 2, network connections. This is why they can be right in front of you and the attack still misses. In my opinion, this is what brings Kendo down the most, and because of this, it's a connection thing, it will most likely be impossible to fix since everyone has different connections to the server, some better, some worse. It also depends on how the server's doing that day. Like, there are so many factors to it. But if you like to play an up close and personal style and want to be a god at 1v1s, Kendo might be the character for you. And for our final character in C tier, we have Cementos. Cementos is a character you either know how to play or you don't. There is no in between. 96% of Cementos players are bad, but the remaining 4% are so good they can keep up with the meta characters. Let's start with his alpha. This skill lets Cementos throw a pillar of concrete wherever you aim it. This skill can be used in 3 different ways. The first is for damage, which is fine, it does okay damage. The next is for defense. You can throw these in front of you or in front of your teammates and pretty much give them a wall, protecting them or yourself from most characters. And the third and final way is for mobility. Yeah, I know, that's not a word that immediately comes to mind when you think of Cementos, but he actually has amazing mobility. You can aim his alpha under you and it will create the pillar under you. Since this also has multiple charges, it will let you get to or create your own high ground in an instant. Next we have his beta skill. With this, Cementos can create a wall, giving himself or teammates cover, much like his alpha, but better. The cool thing about this skill though, is that depending on what direction you're aiming the analog stick, you get different shaped walls. This skill can also be used for damage if there are any enemies in the area when you place the wall, but this rarely ever happens, but I thought I'd mention it just in case. Next we have Cementos' Gamma, the slab. This skill lets Cementos shoot a huge square of cement wherever he aims. This can be used for building, but will mainly be used for damage, since if your enemies get caught in this, they will take decent damage and will be slower while in the highlighted area of the slab. Something cool that also applies to his alpha too is that there isn't really a range limit, so if you are good with angles and trajectories, you can get people who are very, very far away from you. And finally, we have Cementos' special skill, his revive. If a teammate gets downed, you can use his special and instantly revive them, but unlike Shiozaki's revive, Cementos' revive comes with a small amount of protection when you revive. You will be in a small concrete box. This is great if nobody is super close to your downed body, since it gives you time to heal or shield up. But if an enemy is on your body, this revive will trap you in the box with them. Now for the downsides. 1. Cementos gets hard counted by 3 characters. Shigaraki, because he can instantly destroy anything Cementos does, and Bakugo and Endevor. These are less of a counter, but can still be a problem for Cementos because they both have the ability Pierce. They can shoot through any walls Cementos puts up. But other than these 3 characters, Cementos is good. But overall, Cementos is an amazing support that, if you know how to play him, is an asset to any team. Moving into B tier, our next character is one of my favorites, and that's Mr. Aizawa. He may not be a support type, but he sure as hell is good at supporting teammates in fights. He has his alpha, Binding Cloth, which doesn't do damage, but instead pulls your opponent towards you, or if you're in the air, pulls you towards your opponent and then does damage. It's better best to use this on the ground though, since Aizawa's alpha can be comboed into any of his other skills. Plus, your teammates can also attack the enemy while Aizawa has them held, leading to an insane amount of damage, and even one-shot potential under certain circumstances. Something Aizawa also has that's pretty good is mobility with his beta quirk. His kicks are supposed to be used for damage, but to be honest, even at level 9, these kicks don't do that much, plus they're very inconsistent and miss a lot of the time. But as a movement tool, these kicks are excellent, along with his alpha, and combining these can constantly keep Aizawa moving. Next we have his gamma skill. This is usually the attack you will combo into after using Aizawa's alpha. This attack does so much damage, and in most cases will just destroy the enemy's shields and health. Like Denki, you can use Aizawa's gamma to delete the iframes the enemy gets after their shields are broken, if you time it right. Aizawa also has his own special, Erasure. This move is good when it works, but we'll go more into that in a sec. But when Erasure does work, it can be a game changer. First and foremost, it stops any enemies in Aizawa's line of sight from using their skills, alpha, beta, or gamma, but special abilities can still be used while Erasure is in effect. Now for Aizawa's downsides. Let's get the biggest one out of the way first, and the reason a lot more people aren't using him, and that's his alpha skill straight up just not working for no reason whatsoever sometimes. It is so frustrating when this happens because there is nothing you can do to avoid it. It just happens without warning. This is most annoying when you're in the middle of a fight and it happens, since you lose access to grabbing the enemy and the scarf will just bounce off them. The other downside Aizawa's alpha has is the movement aspect of it. When you use it while in the air, at the end of it, Aizawa will do a flip. This makes it very hard to get where you want to go since you can't land exactly where you want to. This can be fixed by doing Aizawa's beta, but at that point, you're using 2 skills just to get to the top of a building or to get to high ground, which really isn't good. The other downside Aizawa has, like I said earlier, is how inconsistent his Erasure is. It is a game-changing ability when it works, but there are a lot of times when you could be looking straight at the enemy using Erasure and it just doesn't register. Admittedly, this has gotten a lot better since the last update, but it's still very much a thing that can happen. Next in B tier, we have our last green character, and that's Momo Yaoyarozu. And I'll be honest with you, she really does not feel like a green character, besides her special ability, which can give you anything from level up cards to shields and health potions. I think Momo would fit so much better as a yellow character, considering how defensive her skills are in nature and how much damage they do when they hit. We have her projectiles. They have little to no range, but what they lack in range, they more than make up for in stopping power. If you start attacking an enemy with Momo's alpha, they can't do anything against it until they get knocked down. Or, if somebody has a skill that requires them to get close for it to work, like Bakugo's Howitzer Impact, Momo can just say, no, and use her projectiles to stop their attack. Something Momo also has, which is great for crowd control and causing visual noise, is her cannons. These are very good, they do good damage, and have an absurd amount of range. So if you see a bunch of teams off in the distance fighting each other, you can cause some chaos and use your cannons. Or, if you are in a fight, you can use the cannons to force your enemies to keep moving. And for Momo's final and best attack, we have her beta, the shield. This attack is what makes Momo such a good character. It does 100 damage per hit, and since it lasts so long, and assuming your opponent doesn't try to run, you can hit them multiple times. This shield has armor on it too, so unless you get hit by another Momo shield, nobody is going to stop you. And to top it all off, you have 2 charges of the shield. So, in the right hands, Momo is definitely a machine of a character, but she does take some getting used to. I guess her only real weakness is that her alpha has little to no range, but again, the fact that it can stop other people's skills is more than a fair trade-off. Our next character is someone I personally think is the perfect character for everyone. Easy to use, and very good when mastered, and that's Mount Lady. Mount Lady is a decent damaging character that has great defense when using her special ability. Let's start with her alpha. To be honest, it's kind of bad. It does average damage, but has very little range, so unless you're kind of close to an enemy, you're probably going to be out of range for most of her alpha attacks. Next we have her beta skill. This is an AoE attack Mount Lady stomps on the floor, sending out shockwaves that does damage to anyone caught in it. But also, this skill stops your enemies while they're in the radius, so they have no option but to take the damage. If you're against a character that needs to get in close to do damage like Iida, this is an excellent skill to keep them away from you. And finally, we have her Gamma. This skill is a directional kick that you can use for good damage, but also, since it's directional, you can use it for movement. The unique thing about using this for movement is that you actually keep your momentum after using the skill. There are a lot of characters in this game that can use skills for movement, but for all of them except Mount Lady, you don't keep the momentum. Mount Lady also has an extra charge added to this skill, so it became even better for movement not too long ago. Now, let's talk about her special ability, since it's definitely her best skill. Gigantification. This lets Mount Lady turn into a giant while this is active. You take less damage, can't be staggered, and all of your attacks do more damage. The only downside to this is that you are a lot slower, but it's a fair trade-off for what you get. In Final Circles, Gigantification is a must-have, since you can jump and use her stomp, and you're guaranteed to hit everybody that's remaining in the circle. And for our final character in B tier, we have Dabi, a character who's easy to beat, but if the person knows how to play, Dabi is near impossible to KO. Dabi's damage is average, even at level 9, but what makes Dabi such a menace is that he's the only character in the game that has projectiles that track. So even though they don't do as much as other projectiles, a bunch of average damage hits can be more deadly than one big damaging attack. But that's not all that makes Dabi a menace. He can also place traps with his beta skill. They stay there permanently until the enemy walks through them, taking damage. These traps are so good, since they are also kind of hard to see if you're not paying attention. You can also play really tactical with them and place them on a box or on player's loot you just KO'd. So if someone tries to go for any of them, they will take damage. You also get an indicator show up when someone walks through one of these traps, so you'll know the general direction of where they are. All of this making Dabi even better. Dabi also has a great skill to keep enemies off him with his Gamma, stomps the floor and creates a ring of fire around him, damaging anyone who tries to enter or leave. But as good as Dabi is, he has two downsides, and they are pretty big ones. The first one is that Dabi doesn't really handle close range fights that well, since he's mainly a zoner character. Sure, he has ways to keep enemies off him with his beta and gamma skills, but even then, most of the time, other players can just power through them with the skill of their own, and then Dabi's in trouble. And his second downside is that his mobility is non-existent, so he really struggles to escape from enemies. You can make this a tiny bit better by carrying a speed card on you, but even then, Dabi still really struggles, which is why you need to use him at mid to long range. Now we move into A tier. This is where you'll start seeing a lot of the characters that are most used in the game because of how good they are. And while all characters can be good, these characters are just simply better. And our first character in A tier, we have the end game nightmare, Shigaraki. A lot like Kirishima, Shigaraki is mainly a close range fighter with a little something extra. Let's start with his best attack, his beta skill. This attack puts out a decay puddle on the ground, and the higher level this skill is, the bigger the puddle. And any enemies within this puddle will take constant tick damage until they are out of it. This skill is godly for keeping enemies off you, since if they stay in the puddle too long, they will get downed. Plus, Shigaraki, after using his beta skill, can freely fight, adding on to that damage even more. Next we have his alpha skill. This attack is kind of like a projectile, but it's attached to the ground. Shigaraki touches the floor and sends a line of decay towards the enemy, doing decent damage if it hits. This move is probably one of his worst, because instead of being an instant shot like other projectiles, it takes a sec to get to the enemies, and because of that, it's super easy to dodge, roll out of, or simply jump, since it's stuck to the floor. As long as you're not touching it, you won't take damage. And for Shigaraki's last skill, we have his Gamma. This is actually a pretty unique skill. Despite all of the other skills in this game, Shigaraki runs towards the enemies, grabs them, and then uses his decay. The thing that makes this skill so unique though, is that even if your opponent has shields, this attack ignores them and does straight HP damage. This attack is excellent if you're fighting someone and they've just plus ultra'd, since plus ultraing only fills shield, so if you can grab them, you'll most likely KO them. But Shigaraki is not only a damage monster, he's actually very good at support too. Using his special skill, Shigaraki can break any building with one hit. This is super useful if you land in landslide or collapse zone, since you can easily break buildings to find survivors. Overall, Shigaraki is a very good character to have at the end of a game, since the circle is so small and his AoE skills shine. Our next character is the newest addition to the game, Endevor. He is a true sniper that excels at mid to long range, but struggles at close range, starting with his alpha. This is a mid-range flamethrower that puts out continuous streams of fire, and does continuous damage while hitting an enemy. Like all his other skills, can be used while flying, but we'll get into that later. His alpha also applies burn damage, so they will take a little bit of extra damage even after being hit. Next we have his beta skill. This is a flaming spear that has amazing range and can hit an opponent halfway across the map. This skill is a 2-hit skill. First, when it hits the enemy, and the second and more damaging one when it explodes. This skill is very unique since, depending where it lands, the explosion will come from a different direction. So you could shoot the flaming spear into a wall, the explosion would then come out sideways. You can also use this to catch enemies off guard. Next we have his gamma skill. This skill is awesome, but also his worst. You'll see why in a sec. With this attack, Endevor charges up his fire and does his signature attack, Prominence Burn. This attack does good damage, and also like Bakugo, this skill has pierce, so it can go through objects. Sadly, this is where the good things about this skill end. We have to talk about the big downside to Endevor's gamma. Number 1, this skill is really slow, and to make it worse, when you use it, a huge red indicator that anybody can see appears, and because it's so slow, people can easily avoid this attack by dodge rolling or moving out of the red zone. Number 2, this attack leaves you wide open to be attacked while using it, and for a second afterwards. So when the enemy very realistically avoids the attack, they can just keep attacking you and potentially KO you since you can't do anything to avoid it. Now let's move on to his special skill, his flight. This skill, in all honesty, is kind of underwhelming. You have 2 options with this skill if you use it. You do a lesser All Might jump, or you can fly in the air until the percentage runs out. The problem is, you can't do both. If you use the jump, then fly, you'll only be in the air for maybe half a second and then fall. Or equally, if you just do a regular jump and then fly, you'll fly for a long time, but you'll have little to no height. This ability is useful for escaping enemies, but overall is kind of meh. Which kind of sums up Endevor, to be honest. He's kind of meh, but in a good way. He's definitely one of the more fairer characters that Biking added to Ultra Rumble. Next we have Deku. Deku is a good at everything but great at nothing kind of character. He has a little bit of everything. Good damage, decent mobility, and a good revive. It starts with his alpha. This skill does very good damage and has a very cool feature. If you crouch and use Deku's alpha, it will have increased range and hit for omega damage, turning Deku into a sniper. But if you do this, it will take up all your charges of your alpha, and you'll need to wait for them to recharge before using again. Next we have his beta, the kick. This skill pretty much does what it says it does. It's a kick that has tracking and super armor, and if you land the hit, does over 100 damage. But you can also use the kick for movement if you really wanted to. You only have 1 charge though, so use it wisely. And finally, we have the gamma skill, Black Whip. This is Deku's weakest skill out of the 3, but it does have its uses. If you jump and use the gamma, you will be pulled towards wherever you are aiming, as long as there's something to attach to. Like Uraraka's grapple, but worse, since you only get the 1 charge, and sometimes it just doesn't work for no reason. But something you can also do with Black Whip is if you're aiming at an enemy and use the gamma skill, it will stop whatever they are doing and pull them towards you. From there, you can use another skill to attack like Aizawa's Scarf. And for Deku's special ability, he can pick up a downed teammate and carry them away. When Deku drops them, they revive. It's not the best insta-revive in Ultra Rumble, but it is definitely useful. But overall, like Mount Lady, Deku is one of the best characters to use if you are just starting out, but also has a very high skill ceiling, so you will always be improving with him. Next in A, we have Denki Kaminari. This character originally was ranked much lower, but due to the recent balance patch, Denki has become somewhat meta because of how good he is now. Let's start with his alpha. Denki's alpha is unlike any other in the game, because it can be used as a projectile, but also as a trap. You can shoot his projectile and if it doesn't hit anybody, it will stay where you shoot it. Using more shots, you can connect them to make a trap. If an enemy is caught in this trap, they will take some damage but also get stunned, which, given the recent change he got, gives Denki one-shot potential. The higher the level of Denki's alpha, the more damage and traps you can connect. Next, we have Denki's beta skill. Pre-balance patch, this was his worst skill, but now it's just as viable as all his others, due to the damage increase it got. With this skill, Denki generates a huge ball of electricity around him, and any enemies inside this electric ball will take constant damage. This is great if there are a lot of enemies around you, since they will try and get away from you, but be careful using this skill, since if you let it run down to 0%, Denki will go into dumb mode, and you will be vulnerable. Next we have Denki's Gamma skill. This is the attack that makes Denki so terrifying to fight. Denki charges towards the enemy, hits them for big damage, but also the enemy gets stunned, so you can carry on attacking, giving Denki yet another one-shot potential skill. Denki's Gamma skill can also be used for movement, which is always nice to have on any character. And the best part of all, because of the latest balance patch, this skill has an extra charge now, making Denki even more deadly. Finally, we have his special skill. Denki covers himself in electricity. If he does any close range attacks, or if an enemy tries to do a close range attack to you, they will take damage and get stunned, making Denki the perfect counter to characters like Iida and Kirishima, since they can only do close range attacks. Combining these with Denki's Gamma skill or Alpha skill, you can actually somewhat stunlock the enemy, and that's why Denki is able to one-shot combo so many people. Next we have a character that's annoyed a lot of people, and that's Uraraka. Uraraka is a speed type character with a very interesting set of skills. Let's start with her alpha, the grappling hook. This can be used for damage like other projectiles, but unlike most projectiles, Uraraka can use this for movement, giving her excellent mobility. If you pair this with her special ability float, which lets you use it on yourself or a teammate to make them weigh less, you will also go so much further. Next we have her beta. This is the skill you've probably all seen. It's her spin. This skill lets Uraraka do a ton of damage for no reason. Usually you'll see Uraraka players grapple into a fight with the alpha, then use the beta to do a ton of damage and then grapple away. It is by far her best and most used tool, and I'm sure, unless it gets a significant nerf, we will keep seeing this skill. And finally we have her Gamma. This one's for the sneaky Uraraka players. This skill is a mid-ish range trap that you can place, and if you catch someone in the trap's radius, it will float them into the air, and they can't do anything to stop this. But that's not where it stops. This trap also has a ton of rubble and stuff floating along with it, so if Uraraka chooses to, she can release that rubble and drop it onto enemies. It can be used a few ways. Number one, if you see people fighting, you can use this to get some damage in and cause chaos. You can use it while in a fight with someone, or, my favorite, you can use it to set up traps. Let's say a box just dropped, and I know everyone's going for it. All I have to do is grapple over there, use Uraraka's Gamma skill, and keep it there until someone tries to open the box. This is a skill you don't really see many Urarakas use, but it can catch people off guard if they don't expect it. Overall, Uraraka is one hell of a good character with extremely good mobility and hard-hitting attacks. Next in A, we have Toga. She is a very versatile character that has only gotten better since launch. We'll start with her alpha skill. It does the least amount of damage out of any projectile in the game, but makes up for that with how fast it is and how much charges it has. It's the only alpha in the game that has 20 charges. With this alpha, Toga can throw her knives at enemies. These knives also have quite a lot of range, so as long as you're not super far away, you can use them to snipe the enemies. Her next skill is her beta. You can use this in two ways. One, for big damage, or two, to escape from a fight. This skill can do huge damage if you know how to use it right, and has two charges, meaning that huge damage gets even bigger. Something else that's unique to this skill is that if you hit an enemy while the beta is still in use, it will extend the time the beta is active. And finally, we have her Gamma. This is mainly what Toga is known for. She can throw her needles at an enemy's blood and become them, temporarily. This skill allows Toga to become whatever you need whenever you need her to be. A damage monster, a healer, or pretty much anything you want. This is what makes Toga such a unique and fun character to play. She is only limited by the characters that the other players are using. Before I carry on, and you Toga mains go down in the comments and say, "Wah," She should be higher. Yes, I've heard all about why she's the best character in the game from some of the better Toga players in the game. And while in theory, I can see why, in reality, not so much. The main argument I've heard for this is that Toga can be whatever the team needs her to be at that time, which in theory is correct, but in reality, not so much. For the character to be whatever she needs her to be, she also needs to collect the blood of that character, which, unless it's a red character, which 90% of the players use, it's probably not going to happen. Less and less people are using healing characters because the meta is not very friendly towards those types as things go. Maybe in the future she will move up the tier list, but we will have to wait and see. There are things that, in my opinion, make Toga the best character in the entire game, but these are bugs and exploits, and I promised someone that I wouldn't show them, plus I wouldn't want to show people, because if you show people something, they're going to try it out, and then we'll have a bunch of OP Togas running around. So I'm purely ranking her without bugs and exploits. Our next character in A is someone who I've probably played the most of out of any other character in this game, and that's All Might. All Might is a tank of a character that can hit like an isekai truck, as well as having superb mobility. All Might is a character that can do huge damage and take very little if you know how to play him. Let's start with his alpha. All Might can rapid fire his blasts, not doing that much damage because of the damage decrease, but still doing quite a lot. Next, we have his beta skill. This is a hard-hitting skill. Not only does it do amazing damage, but it also has super armor, so it can't be stopped. This skill can hit for over 100 per shot, and you have multiple charges of it, making All Might a scary opponent to fight. Next, we have his Gamma, the Tornado. This is one of All Might's best attacks because he can do damage with it, but also, while doing the Tornado, you are invincible and won't take any damage whatsoever while it is active. So that skill can be used for attacking or defending. And finally, we have his special ability. All Might actually has two different ones, and until Endevor released, was the only character to have two different specials. The first of these being a super jump that gives All Might amazing mobility. Since he can jump so high off the ground, he can escape a fight, or he can move to wherever he needs to be, but also it has a very quick cooldown, so you'll be using this skill constantly. I truly believe that if All Might continues to be the same way he is, he will become one of the best characters in the game due to power creep. We have already seen this with some characters that haven't been changed, and All Might is definitely one of them. Our final character in A is Kirishima. At first, he may not seem that good, but the more you use him, the more OP he feels. Let's start with his biggest feature, his special ability, Hardening. This is what makes Kirishima so OP. While using Hardening, Kirishima takes less damage from attacks, kind of like Mount Lady's special, but also, while hardened, Kirishima is immune to being staggered by attacks. So, if an Iida is coming at you with his beta skill, you will take less damage and it will just slide off you, no stagger whatsoever. You will also still be able to use all your other skills while hardened. The only bad thing about Kirishima's hardening is that you are much slower while it's active, but it's a very fair trade-off considering what it does. Kirishima, believe it or not, actually has some pretty good mobility too. You can use his alpha skill to escape from a fight. This is how most people use it. But also, you can use his beta skill, which has great damage by the way, to get to high ground. And for Kirishima's Gamma, and also his strongest attack, he does this AoE stomp that will hit anyone in or its radius for over 100 damage, which is insane. You can also use his Gamma while in the air, so if you see enemy teams fighting below you, you could drop in with this skill and do massive damage. Kirishima only really has one downside, and 70% of the time, it does not really matter unless you're fighting certain characters, and that's that Kirishima has no projectiles. This can be a pain if you're fighting someone like Dabi, Endevor, or Froppy, who are all mainly zoners or characters that are constantly moving. Since Kirishima's only option is to fight close range, he really does struggle against some characters. Now we are finally getting to the S tiers of My Hero Ultra Rumble. These characters are meta and are just a level above all other characters in the game. Our first character in S would have been higher, but she keeps getting hit by every single balance patch, and that's Froppy. To me, Froppy is the ultimate annoyance character because she can get in, do small amounts of damage, and get out with her amazing mobility. And most of the time, unless a team is chasing her, she can avoid most damage. Let's start with her alpha. Like Uraraka, Froppy can use her alpha for damage, but the main way it's used is for movement. Since Froppy can jump quite high, you can reach high places very easily if you combine it with her alpha. Next we have her beta skill, which recently got nerfed with a size reduction, but can still be used well. With this skill, Froppy uses her tongue in a sweeping motion, sideways if it's on the ground and horizontally if it's in the air, to attack enemies and do damage. The air version of this attack is pretty cool because you can combo after it since it has a floor bounce. Next we have her Y skill. This lets Froppy turn invisible until she does another action, like using another skill or attacking. This skill can be good to confuse your enemies, and you can hide well. And it also gives you options to heal when in a fight. You could jump, use the alpha to get away, then use the gamma and drink a health up shield potion. And finally, we have her special ability, which is a revive, one of the best revives in the game, since it's an instant, but with the uniqueness of pulling your downed teammates towards you. So, if they get downed and kicked into the storm, as long as they are not too far away, you can pull them towards you, and then instantly revive. Froppy is a character that has always been one of the best in the game, but after all these nerfs, she has become way more balanced. To be honest, I personally think that Biking has nerfed her a little too much, but where she is right now is fine. Next in S tier, we have the character everybody loves to hate, and that's Bakugo. Bakugo is the best solo damage character in the game. Let's start with his alpha. This is a top 3 projectile, 100%. It does the best damage, and at level 9 can hit for nearly 100 per shot. Bakugo is the only character whose alpha hits this hard, besides Deku using his crouched alpha, or somebody using plus ultra. The thing that makes Bakugo's alpha so scary is that it has pierce, so it can shoot through walls and other solid objects, making cover pretty much useless if Bakugo has a rough idea of where you are. Next we have his beta skill, his grenades. These are definitely the weakest of his abilities, but they are still very, very useful. You can either use them when you start your approach by throwing the grenade at the opponents and then start attacking, or you can throw them in a direction where you hear or see fighting and hope it hits. Surprisingly, it hits a lot more than you think it would. Finally, we have Bakugo's Gamma. This skill can hit for nearly 200 damage at level 9. Bakugo spins in the direction you aim and ends the spin with a huge explosion. Most of the time, it's not that hard to land a hit with this skill, and in most cases, the skill will go through a lot of other characters' skills. There are some that will cancel each other out, or just break Bakugo's Gamma. The other thing that makes Bakugo such a good character is his special ability. Bakugo uses his explosions to get a dash burst, letting him basically fly. This gives Bakugo amazing mobility and the power to gain height anytime he likes, and gives Bakugo one of the best escape options in the entire game. As for downsides, Bakugo doesn't really have any. I've seen people in the past say that Bakugo's weakness is that he doesn't work well with teams, but that just isn't true. Bakugo is great at supporting his teammates in a fight, or if an enemy starts a fight with your teammate, Bakugo can use his special to fly over and provide support. This is the same if someone gets KO'd. Bakugo can fly over, grab their coin, and revive them. So yeah, Bakugo is just that good. That's why everybody uses him. He is a low effort, high reward character. So just think, if you barely have to try to dominate with him, think about the players that are trying and how OP and impossible to fight they feel. I'm sure in the future Bakugo will get some slight nerfs, but even then he will still be a meta character in my opinion. Next, we have probably one of the most annoying characters in all of My Hero Ultra Rumble, and that's Iida. This man, as soon as balance patch time comes, goes full Recipro and dodges any kind of nerfs that would come his way. Iida is the full package when it comes to My Hero Ultra Rumble. He does good damage, has arguably some of the best mobility of any character in the game, and even has a revive as his special ability. You can also chain hits from Iida's alpha together if you get the first hit to land. Not only does this attack do decent damage, it is also amazing for mobility and gives you one of many escape options. Moving on to Iida's beta, his best skill, the kick. Not only does this attack do amazing damage, it also tracks the enemy, which is OP as hell. Sometimes it's even tracked enemies I didn't even know were there hiding in bushes. That's how OP this is. But also it has super armor, so it can't be stopped, making it that much more OP. Luckily, there is a way around this attack, but we'll talk about that in Iida's downsides. Next we have his Gamma quirk. This skill lets Iida go from being one of the best characters in mobility to nobody even coming close to how good his mobility becomes. By using the Gamma, Iida activates Reciprocal Burst, and for a limited time, depending on what level you have the skill at, everything Iida does is super fast. All his skills, his jabs, and his sprint get a speed boost. The downside to this skill is that it only lasts for so long, and once it runs out, Iida's engines get burnt out. Only for a few seconds, in which you can't do anything except walk super slowly, leaving you super vulnerable. Now let's get into Iida's biggest downside, dodge rolling. Yes, it really is that simple. If you dodge roll just before an attack, you can avoid every single attack Iida has. The problem is that only very few people know how to do this, so for those that don't, Iida can seem impossible to KO. And finally, we have the best character in all of My Hero Ultra Rumble, Todoroki. This to me is a no contest placement, since he has everything you could ever want and more. The more part is why he is so much better than everyone else. You'll see why in a sec. Let's start with his alpha skill, which is by far the best alpha skill in the game. His fireballs. These do great damage per shot and are also the fastest projectile to use in succession. And just to top it all off even more, Todoroki's alpha also has burn damage, so you'll take a small amount of damage even after being hit by one. Next we have his beta skill, the ice wall. This is an amazing skill because 1, it lets Todoroki create cover wherever he is, and 2, the ice wall actually does very good damage if you can hit it. I don't see many people use it for damage, but it can be used this way. Something else that makes the wall so good is the fact that Todoroki can freely shoot through the wall to do damage while still being protected. And now for the skill that makes Todoroki better than just everyone else. His Gamma, the Ice Slide. This skill right here is dumb. It is too good for no reason. This skill lets Todoroki either surf on the ice path for excellent movement and freezes anybody who walks through it, but also Todoroki has the option to not ride the ice and shoot the ice path in front of him, also freezing anybody who steps into it. You may be thinking, that doesn't sound too bad, but I haven't even gotten to what makes this skill so broken. So, like I said, if anybody gets caught in the ice path, they get frozen. But while they are frozen, they are stuck there for a good second or two. And while stuck there, Todoroki and his teammates can freely attack you, and there's nothing you can do about this. Much like Denki's, this skill also has iframe deletion, and has the best version of it. With Denki, you kind of have to time it for it to work, but with Todoroki, it is so easy, most of the time people don't even realize they are doing it. As long as the person is frozen in the ice, you can do damage, break the shields, and because they are frozen, they don't get any iframes. So, let's say you do this while you have your team with you, and they are all using characters with good damage. You can take 99% of their health and all of their shields, and in some cases even one-shot someone. Like, this skill is absurdly busted. It is one that definitely needs to be tweaked. And finally, we have Todoroki Special. There's not much to say about this. He throws a line of fire that will damage anyone who stays inside it. This is actually one of the worst skills because it has very situational uses. For example, let's say a teammate is downed and is about to be finished off for shields. You can throw this fire, they can stay in there and avoid being KO'd, but even then, the enemy can just use their alpha to finish them off. Besides this, I haven't really found a good use for Todoroki Special, but overall, Todoroki is just far better than anyone else in the game, and needs a nerf as soon as possible. And this is what our first tier list looks like. Like I said in the beginning of the video, when it comes to balance patch time, we will change the tier list to reflect that and keep it up to date. But let me know down in the comments what you think of this tier list, and if there's anyone you would change. My name is Webb, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.